What I'm going to do is just refresh the principles of a justice-seeking church to start with, because they're the backdrop. Next week we'll maybe look at the priorities as the backdrop, but today the principles, and I'm just going to share my screen to revisit those principles if I can. Here we go. Where are they? All right, I'm just trying to, there we go. So I'm not sure you can see those with the everything else on the screen, but hopefully you can see enough of them. The principles of a justice-seeking church, just as a quick reminder. The first principle is that God made human beings in the image of God, each worthy of equal value and dignity. It's a basic principle of what we believe as Christian people, that all humankind bears the divine image, and therefore that affects how we respond and react and how we value. The second principle, that God desires the flourishing of creation and the human community within it. So the search for justice does not diminish the flourishing of others, but seeks to enable it. There is an interconnectedness within our created world, within our human community, a recognition that one action can have far-reaching effects in other places. The third one, that God constantly shows a bias to people experiencing poverty and those who are excluded. We do not have to go far in our biblical exploration to see those stories. And so for those of us who seek justice, we must attend to those who live in poverty, to those who are marginalised. They must be our priority. Fourthly, that God entrusts those with power with a special responsibility for upholding justice. We each of us have power in different ways. We each of us, both individually and collectively, have some power. But for some people, there is power within the role, within the responsibility that they have. And for those of us who seek justice, we continually encourage, uphold and challenge those people who may have the power to make change. Fifthly, that God calls all people and nations to actively work for peace and justice. Peace and justice is never somebody else's responsibility. We all have a part to play in it. And finally, God calls us to live in hope and in ways that reflect God's character and the pattern of God's kingdom. As we seek justice, it involves honesty, truth, integrity. It may at times demand of us protest or resistance, forgiveness, reconciliation. Forgiveness, justice seeking, though, is always about the hope and the work towards transformation. So those are our principles of a justice-seeking church. Where I thought we would focus today is on that passage from Isiah that we will be reading, I imagine, at some point, part of it in the run up to Christmas, in our carol services and so on. I'm just aware. Can you read that, or is it full of various things on the screen? I've got a bar across mine. Is that?
I can read it.
Yeah.
Everyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I wondered, therefore, as a change from my voice, if someone would read it for us. Would that be possible? It's from Isaiah 9, 2-7.
In the absence of volunteers, I'll read it.
Thanks, Chris.
I couldn't see anyone waving, sorry.
The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. I need you to move the screen down because I can't see the last bit.
That's it. That's it. You're there.
All right, okay.
You finished. So there should have been a full stop.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. You will note that I've left the whole reading in. Often we have the first verse there, that verse 2, and then we go straight down to verse 6, and we miss out the bits about plunder and blood and boots and all of those bits, don't we? We keep it nice and neat in terms of our Christmas and narratives and our Advent narratives. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can see each other. So Isaiah is speaking. I mean, we could spend a long time on Isaiah and the different voices within Isaiah, but essentially Isaiah is speaking to people throughout who live in three different time periods. There's the before the Babylon exile, during the Babylon exile, and after the exile. And this passage and the one in Isaiah 7 that we often use in our Advent and Christmas narratives is spoken to the southern kingdom of Israel, to Judah. And the king of Judah, King Ahaz, he's under pressure. He's under pressure from Syria. He's under pressure from the north. He's under pressure from Assyria. He's sending a king's ransom to Assyria to see if they will offer protection. And in the midst of all this, we have a nation that is feeling powerless. They've got enemies on every side. And no sense really of where is God. They feel abandoned in the midst of all of this. And so into this, Isaiah speaks and he offers hope. He offers this hopeful image of a child who will come, who will embody the presence of God. Isaiah 7:14, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. So we have this hope of a new beginning for this beleaguered people, this hope of somehow divine presence that will bring about change. This oracle didn't anticipate or predict Jesus. It would have been used to announce and celebrate the birth of a new royal prince. Very likely, this was Hezekiah, Ahaz's son. And so this would be sort of like that anticipation that this new king was coming and it was all going to be well. It was a bit like the sort of, we've got a new government, this is what's going to happen in this new government. We've got a new president, this is what's going to happen, and it's all going to be wonderful, and everything's going to flourish, and we're going to be at peace. It has that resonance of that sort of political speech that everything's going to be all right because we've got this new beginning coming. So it anticipates a new regime that will speak into oppression, that will bring about justice and all will be well. And in the midst of this passage, these 4 extravagant titles are assigned to this new king. And what the Christian church has done is taken, as we've tried to make sense of Jesus, to say, these all fit Jesus. These all fit Jesus. I'm not sure that all of them do, but we'll explore a little bit of that. So the 4 titles, just quickly as a reminder of those 4 titles, they are, here we go. Have you got them? Oh, no. Am I sharing that or not?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. The joys of technology. Quickly. So the 4 titles that we're just going to spend a little bit of time on this morning are Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. These were titles that were given in anticipation of this new king and this new role, and that the Christian church has extrapolated and put upon Jesus. They are the titles that Isiah gives to this Messiah figure. Wonderful Counselor. Just to say, there is no comma between the two. Handel, in his Messiah, puts in the comma, and so we have 2 phrases. We have wonderful and counselor. I'm glad Rob's nodding there. It's not. It's one phrase. Wonderful Counselor. No comma. Counselor of Wonders. The term counselor refers to the exercise of governance, the capacity to administer, to plan, to execute policy. And so this new king will bring about a different way of governance. It will be a governance for the whole realm. This king won't just be a good administrator. They will be wonderful. They will be exceptionally wise. Isiah is speaking of this hope of a new governance filled with wisdom. Now, sadly, Hezekiah did not fulfill those expectations, and no earthly king has. But we can see how the early church used this as a testimony for Jesus, the long-expected king who would set people free, who brings in the new kingdom, the kingdom of God. And of course, there are resonances. Hezekiah is there facing the Assyrian Empire. Jesus is born into the Roman Empire. Both places of military might, of coercive taxation. And so there is huge hope within this new king of a new way of doing governance, a new way in which the world might work. As a justice-seeking church, this title, I think, resonates for us. One of the things that we found in the Walking with Micah consultation was that as we sought lots of stories, all of the stories were about what people were doing. They were all wonderful stories of people doing food banks and working with the homeless and so on and so forth. But we found it incredibly hard to find those stories about how the systems might change. So Tutu famously once said, "We keep pulling people out of the river, but we never go upstream to find out why they're falling in." There is something in a justice-seeking church that isn't just about pulling people out, but is about asking why they fall in. In the Wonderful Counselor name, we have that hope of a new way of doing things, a new system, a way of being. And for me, that speaks of why people fall in to the river rather than just the pulling out. The second title for this new king, and that is becomes the title for the Messiah, is Mighty God. In the context of the Hebrew scriptures, the king was in many ways regarded as sacred. The king was the carrier, the bearer of the power and authority that properly belonged to God. He was a vehicle of the divine. The king, therefore, is responsible for the prosperity of the whole realm. An effective king would assure victory in war, success in economics, productivity in agriculture, justice in social relations. And so Isaiah speaks not just of an earthly king, but a Messiah, the King of Kings, who will exercise the power of God in the world. We know that on Sunday we had Christ the King, the Feast of Christ the King, where we recognize that power of God through Christ, the sovereignty of Christ. The church, I think, well, certainly in the early church, struggled to work out what the divinity of Christ, was Christ divine, what was that about, and so on and so forth. But as those of us who were in church or who preached yesterday, I'm always struck by the readings of Christ the King are actually readings of a different sort of power. They are the readings of Jesus before Pilate, arrested and subverting the power of Rome. It is the image of the sheep and the goats, where the power of the divine king is one who recognizes that power exerted in compassion, in the marginal, in the poorest. As I said about my experience in Parliament last week, reflecting on power and where power lies in these majestic halls. You know, we were in the Westminster Palace and in the central lobby. And it really felt miles and miles away from the centre of Crewe or Stoke-on-Trent. So power is an interesting question for a justice-seeking church. Power in itself is neutral, but the question is what power that we have. What power do we have as individuals? What power do we have as a church? What power do we have collectively? How do we exercise that power? And if we believe in the one who is, in the term, a mighty God, where do we see the power of God at work? Something to ponder later in our groups. The third phrase we have is Everlasting Father. This title would have been given to the king as an expectation, that came from the expectations of a patriarchal society. The father being the head of the family or the tribe or the clan, therefore the one who held responsibility and power within that context. In Isaiah, the image is transferred to the state. And so the power and responsibility lay with the king, who is the father of the nation. But this is not just father, this is everlasting Father. This denotes reliability, steadfastness, and of course, divinity. It is about the care and protection and compassion for the whole people. It's not a title we can easily put on Jesus. He never was referred to as Father, but there is something about how he was how he responded, how he lived, that element of compassion that runs through his ministry. But what does compassion look like for a justice-seeking church? When are we propping up people rather than acting with compassion? I learned a very big lesson as a probationer minister with a lady who had, she was an alcoholic, and we did everything to help this lady. We did all sorts of things for her as a church. We offered her huge compassion. We took her to AA meetings. People rallied round. They really did. Until one day I had a knock on my door and a lady turned up who said, "You don't know me. I'm a recovering alcoholic. You are not helping this woman. You are not helping this woman," she said, "because all you are doing is propping her up." Where does, in our compassion, where does that line sit between how we support others and how we might actually hinder others? The last title, Prince of Peace. The king is not only responsible for the social order and a prosperous economy, but is also understood that none of those things are possible unless there is peace. The word, of course, is shalom, not merely the absence of hostility, but the promotion of welfare for all. And peace can only come from the practice of justice for all, including the poorest and the most needy. Peace can never emit from unjust policy, coercion, or exploitation. We have, of course, the famous passage from Micah 4 that we often bring out on Remembrance Days. In Micah 4:1, beginning at verse 1. "In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. People shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own trees, and no one shall make them afraid." Micah anticipates people coming together, a voluntary disarmament as a prelude to peace, shalom for all. But that's not what we have in Isaiah 9. Here, just going back to verse 5, we have those bits that we often miss out. "Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire." It's quite a violent image. And what it is saying is that the weapons of the defeated are destroyed and peace is imposed by the victor. So the victor, this isn't we voluntarily give up our weapons, we voluntarily live in peace. This is about those who have lost in battle, been forced to destroy their weapons, and peace been imposed. So we have two sorts of peace there. We have the Micah one of everybody gives everything up and it's great and it's wonderful. And we have Isaiah 9, where the peace comes out of the force of others. Jesus, there are no claims in the Gospels for him to be the Prince of Peace. But of course, the word peace is part of his ministry. Shalom. Go in peace, your faith has healed you. It is about that wholeness, not just of physical healing, but a wholeness. When you go into a house, you offer that blessing of peace upon the house, he says. A relational shalom. And of course, in John, my peace I give you, I do not give as the world gives. An inner peace. We see in the Gospels Jesus who lived out that shalom through forgiveness and healing, through humility, through crossing barriers, through deep compassion for the vulnerable, through putting self aside, all elements that are needed for peace. I wonder what shalom looks like for us in a world that seems to be at the moment filled with violence and narratives of war. But I just wanted to tell you one story. I said last week in my video that I like stories, and so I'm just going to tell you one story of maybe what justice looks like. And it's a story that comes from Hull, which is where I come from. I know it always used to make me laugh when I lived down south that they used to pronounce it with an A. Oh, you come from Hull? No, Hull. So when Hull was the city of culture, me and Andrew went and had a long weekend there. One of my brothers who got really heavily into the city of culture said, we would like you to come and we'll be your tour guides, which was great. I mean, it was the city that I grew up in, but I left at 18. And so we saw all of this city of culture stuff. But in one of the museums, there was a board up which taught of the number of men, and they were all men, who had died in the fishing trade. And it was an enormous number, a huge number. It was a visual display of fish, each one representing a man who had died in the fishing trade. And as we drove through Hull, a place called a Hessel Road, there was on the end of a terraced house a mural painted of a woman wearing a headscarf. And I said to my brother, who is that? And he said, oh, that's Lily Bollocker. Now, I remembered then as a child that the name of Lily Bollocker was like, if you weren't behaving, if you were getting a bit above yourself, you were as bad as Lily Bollocker. It was a word for, well, she was a fishwife. So it was sort of one of those insults. You're a bit common, a bit gobby. You were been like Lily Bollocker. And so I looked up Lily Bollocker. Lily Bollocker was somebody who worked at just that, as a fish gutter. Her husband and son worked on the trawlers. And the fishing industry, to be out on the trawlers, was one of the most dangerous industries at that time in the country. And after one particularly bad night where 58 men died, Lily Bollocker felt that enough was enough. And so with other women, they started to look into what needed to change. And what they found was something not particularly extraordinary. What they found was that all of these men had lost their lives because the trawlers didn't have a radio operator. If these trawlers had had a radio operator, there would have been assistance as soon as they got into trouble. But they didn't, because it cost too much to put a radio operator onto each trawler, according to the companies that ran the boats. And so Lily galvanized, and they were all women, into meetings. She galvanized a petition of 10,000 signatures that she took to Harold Wilson's house and picketed Harold Wilson's house. In 6 weeks, the headscarf revolutionaries had done something that the unions couldn't do, because they got legislation changed that every single trawler had to have a radio operator on. If you look up Lily Blocker, you will see that it was thought to be one of the best social actions that took place. But of course, Lily got death threats. She was sacked from her job, and she was never allowed to work again in the fishing industry. And in many parts of Hull, her name was synonymous with those who were troublemakers. What does justice look like for us as a Christian people? I include that story just because I like stories, and sometimes we need these stories to challenge us to hear what ordinary everyday people might do in the name of justice. Right, you've heard enough from me. There are a number of questions. I invite you to pick whatever you like, really, and go with whatever you like on this, wherever it takes you. The first question is about that passage. How do you see Jesus fulfilling the titles in Isaiah 9? The second question refers to that title, Wonderful Counselor, which offers hope of a new form of governance, a new way of doing things. What do we long to see change? What sort of governance would that change require? The third one is a question about power. Power in itself is neutral. It's how we use the power that is important. So the question is, what power do we have individually? What power do we have collectively? How might we use that power in the face of injustice? The fourth question links with that. Where are we seeing God's power at work today in society? The fifth question you might want to look at is using that river analogy, that we spend so much energy pulling people out rather than asking why they are in the river in the first place. So my question is, what does that look like in your context? And finally, about peace. In a world in which the predominant stories are of war and violence, what is ours to do if we are people who pursue peace? So please take whatever question you want in your group.